Hey everyone, welcome to another great episode of Sales 101, the B2B Sales Classroom. We're your hosts, Donald C. Kelly and
BJ J. Allen.
BJ Allen. You like that? Multiple J's there.
Donald always throws in his middle name initials. I wanted to throw in mine, but already in my
That's when you
name.
know you're official now, Donald C. I just hide my middle name. I'll tell you guys this once. It's Cecil, all right? All right? Who wants to go around and say their name Cecil all the
Come
time?
on now, that's a beautiful name, Donald.
Well, we're pumped and we're excited to be here today with this episode. Now that you know my full name, we can officially be family. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, this show is designed to be very simple. We get college professors teaching sales, and we have them share insights on ways that they're teaching sales to help other college professors who are teaching sales as a resource to help the next generation. We also bring in experts, people who are out in the field, as well as individuals who are leading sales teams to share wisdom and ideas of things that are working right now that they want so that we can help the next generation of sellers. Today, we have a combination of both. And this gentleman is a friend of BJ. So I'll let BJ take it away, even though now he's my friend because you're so darn cool.
So, Greg Zippi is an adjunct professor at BYU, and he teaches some of the other sales classes. And he actually got to BYU about a year before I did, so about 6 years ago. And Greg is like one of the sales goats, as the kids would say. It's just so much knowledge, so much understanding, and then an ability to teach us. So he worked in sales and sales trainings for so many companies, Adobe, IBM, and just wanted to come back to college and teach. And his main focus was, I want to teach some of the things that I saw that kind of new sales people were lacking, some of the things maybe universities weren't teaching. So you're going to hear on the podcast, he's going to tell you a little about his story. He's going to tell you about some of the things he emphasizes. You're going to love it.
I won't tell you anything else. That's all. We got you at a cliffhanger there. It's great. As we dive in, you'll get a chance to meet our good friend Greg and see why we say he is the sales goat. Check it out. Professor Zip, welcome to the show. I'm sorry, Professor Zippi, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I've been looking forward to talking to you guys.
Well, BJ has talked you up a lot. So BJ, I don't know if you want to help even more, hype him up even more like we've have. So
yeah, so me and Professor Zippi teach the two main sales classes at Brigham Young University. And I always have to hear all the students talk about how much better his class is than mine. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm not in a competition here. And yeah, but he's just a wealth of knowledge. Our students love his class. He brings a ton of knowledge from industry, and he's also just very student-centric, student-friendly. So, man, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today, Greg.
Well, thank you. And you're not telling the truth on that intro. They love your class too, and they have never told me that my class is better. So.
The
But
goat
I'm glad
doesn't
to be
need
here
to
with
hear
you
that they're
guys.
great. They already know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Greg, one of the things that always fascinates BJ and I is people's process to get to higher ed, especially leaving the professional world. What dragged you from the boardrooms, so to speak, and the golf courses to classroom?
Yeah, I wish there'd have been golf courses. That's an old notion, but it's a great question, and my story is probably not very similar to many others. I got into sales in 1986. I graduated from BYU with an MBA in 1983 and went into finance, and was transferred to Chicago in 1985 and got approached by someone that I played basketball with and went to church with about what he called an experiment. And the experiment is that he was running a sales organization for a software company. And we have to remember that in 1986, there were probably a few dozen software companies in the whole world. There just weren't very many. And so he couldn't hire fast enough for people who were experienced from these other companies. And the company was growing very rapidly. So he said, do you want to be an experiment? At first I said no. Eventually I said yes. So I came in with no background in software or selling. And it was the hardest year of my life. That first year was just brutal. Lots of trial and error. I had no one in my family to turn to. There was no good sales literature at the time. There wasn't much training available, no university courses, none of that. So the early years of my career were just really, really difficult. In fact, I did make my quota the first year, but closed probably about a third of it in the last 2 weeks of the year, which is not a healthy way to live. The company was Oracle Corporation when it was small. I guess I should have thrown that in. So
Small
when I
company,
joined
huh?
Oracle, yeah, small then. I was employee number 153, and we were doing about 50 million in sales when I joined. And 4.5 years later, we were at $1 billion, and there were no acquisitions there. So anyway, I went through my entire career doing software sales for early stage companies. Then I retired in 2019, and I realized that. And by then I'd moved from Chicago. We were there about 20 years, and I'd moved to Utah to join a young company here that did well, and then retired in 2019, and decided it was time to give back. And one of the key things is that I and all the people around me, we'd been hiring people out of the universities here in Utah, and they weren't as prepared as they might have been. They were prepared more than I was for sure, but they could have been prepared better. So I had an idea of a bespoke class that might prepare them better. So I approached BYU. It's about 40 minutes from where I live, and pitched the class. And they said, go ahead and try. And the whole idea was that it was to try and avoid the trial and error I went through, and to prep them better, and to base it on not just my experience, because I think that would be dangerous, but rather to use research that was out there, and then use my experience just kind of to spice it up. So that's how I came into being a part of the faculty at BYU. I've been an adjunct there now since 2020.
Wow. That's awesome. Love the background, love the experience, and especially with it's very familiar hearing folks who have done it and try to prevent people from going the hard way, the trial and error. Which goes into when you and I first connected, and you're talking about your early stage. I think when you were teaching sales was at
University of Oklahoma. During my
yeah.
teaching program was the first time I taught sales. Yeah.
You mentioned this idea, again, going back to this research-based curriculum, and I think you started off with spin selling. And maybe you can give us a little bit of insight on that, BJ, and then maybe we can get Professor Zippi to talk about how and why that's so important.
Yeah. So I mean, I took a very similar approach to Greg when I was first teaching and this is from an earlier discussion we had with Greg, where he said, like, he had a ton of experience, but he didn't want to just come in and be like, oh, let me teach the young bucks how I do things. And so, like, to really teach like a research-based curriculum, and really, I didn't want it to use the traditional textbook. So I used Spin. Greg uses Spin in his class now, and he uses, I think, the Challenge. You still use the Challenger. And, so me and Donald put together our textbook. We want it to be more of a training manual. It was very research-based. So, like, I appreciate the approach that Greg takes. So, Greg, why don't you just tell us a little bit about why you decided on those two, Challenger and Spin? And then I'd just love to hear kind of how that fixes the problem that you saw. Like, what are the things you're teaching students that you wish they would have come into your company at the entry-level positions with those skills?
Yeah. That's great. And I just learned something new about you, because I thought I was the only one crazy enough to start with Spin nowadays, because it's been around so long. But it leads into exactly why I chose it. And it's because for me, I believe it was the first research-based approach to complex selling. All the approaches previously had been for simple sales. And this part is opinion, but I actually believe that until the Challenger was written, almost every other sales book that was done was some sort of a takeoff on Spin. And he had done the research. He had presented the concepts. I actually don't like his questioning method, but I do make the students go through it, because I think it's the foundation that a lot of modern complex selling training is based on. And his
concepts. When you say he, you're referring to Neil for
Neil
Spin?
Rackham. Neil Rackham.
Yeah,
His concepts are just phenomenal. And other people go through and they change the names, but they're still the same concept. So I just tell my students, you're not going to understand the examples he gives because they're so old and I have to bring them up to speed sometimes. But we use it as a foundation because I believe he's kind of the foundation that everybody is built on. And then I think the next big breakthrough in how to sell was Challenger. And that was based on top of spin. A lot of people will say to you, well, I like to follow Challenger selling, and they don't act like there's anything underneath it. If you don't have the concepts from spin or just the early one, the idea of just, figuring out what their situation is and the problem and all those things that he went through, and people call them other things. But if you don't start from there, Challenger doesn't sit in a vacuum. But I think Challenger comes a lot closer to meeting the needs that we have today. So that's why I chose those two. With that, one of the things because the second part of the question you asked is, how do I go about using these things and how do I use them to prepare the students in today's world? And for me, we can use those concepts, but one of the big things that I break from, and there's research on this one too, is that if you look at most people's CRMs in the real world, their CRM looks from the seller's viewpoint. And so they'll start with, it's a suspect. And I want to mention something about that in a second if we have time. And then they go prospect, and then they go, did we give a demo? And then we give a proposal. And those are just all from the seller's viewpoint. And they don't really tell us how a sale is progressing. It doesn't tell us what to do that addresses where they might be in their buyer's journey. So one of the things I do is I teach them what the buyer's journey is, which is very different. And if I were just to throw in quickly, the first 4 phases they go through are they decide if there's a problem they might even want to solve. And then they decide, is it worth solving? And then they decide, how does this fit with all the other priorities that would be competing for the same money in our organization? And then finally, they decide, well, then what would a solution look like? And they're doing that all on their own because we're calling them suspects in all of those steps. And then the next thing they do is they vet vendors. And we're coming in very late in the process when they're vetting vendors. Interesting things is in today's world, I don't worry about when the decision maker comes in. And I know that breaks a lot of things people talk about. But if we look today, again, the research, and this is Challenger research, this one, is that people are looking to have consensus buying in their organizations anyway. And so if you start with the decision maker, it can actually make your deal more difficult. And I know that one from experience. If you sell the end users and those that are going to be impacted by what you're selling first, they'll make sure that the decision maker gets on board. And the decision maker wants them to do that. Now, the one thing I do want to know is that they've got the blessing of a decision maker before I spend very much time with them.
I think that's where people misses the point. Like they will flirt with the wrong individual a long time, hoping that they can get the result without asking the question if this was, blessed, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, in fact, one of my favorite things, and I know we don't sell in person as much as I used to, but I'm hearing from my friends in industry that we're moving back that direction a little bit, is that when I would go on site at the end of a first call, we would find out who the decision maker was. And I would say, is he or she here today? And if they said, well, yes, or I don't know, I'd say, can I just go shake their hand? And I didn't care if they were even there. What mattered is that they were willing to walk me to the office because it meant they were working with the blessing of that decision maker. It wasn't just going to be that I was there out of the blue. And oftentimes we'd get introduced and sometimes we wouldn't. But sometimes you could tell they were very uncomfortable, and then you knew we don't have a decision maker behind this. Just a little anecdote that, and I'll often share that one in my class. So that's kind of the things that I wanted them to see a little bit differently. And then it goes somewhat to the format of the whole class. We do things, the first semester I taught concepts, and the students at the end, they evaluated me. And I actually had them do it before the semester ended. We had a conversation because I was new. And they said, these are great concepts. We've got to practice them. And I said, you're on. That's what I'll do next semester. And now that made my life a lot harder because it's a lot harder when they practice to grade them. But it gave them a much richer experience. So maybe I could share real quickly now, and I'm doing a lot of talking. Do you guys want to break in with any questions or anything?
No,
Man,
this is
he-
awesome.
He's
Yeah,
cooking,
keep
right,
going.
BJ? This is good.
So
Yes, as the kids
um,
say, you're cooking, Greg.
I'm cooking. Okay, I know all their terms. I'm okay. So the format is heavy with role play and practice that they do. They do one presentation to the whole class. They do a total of 6 presentations that last from 4 minutes to 15 minutes. And if they don't do it in front of the class, then they turn it in online. They record it. We grade the videos and give them feedback that way. And it's all structured around this. I'm going to tell you how we set that up. But I saw a statistic, and I was trying to think before I jumped on with it today, and I can't remember if it was Rain Group or somebody else. But 79% of buyers, when they get to the end of their sales process or buying process for them, they'll say, we can't tell the difference between anybody that we've talked to. 79% get to the end and they say, we can't tell. So then you're stuck with a commodity situation, or at least in their minds it is. And so I wanted to make sure that the students understood, how do you take that off the table? How do you not let yourself be seen as the same as everybody else out there? And that's really important. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out how to differentiate ourselves. And we do 6 different presentations that do that. The first thing we look at is, well, let me even back up. At the beginning of the semester, they all select what we call a mentor. And that is someone who is in sales in a real company selling a real product right now. And they talk to that mentor to understand some things. It only takes about 2 or 3 hours of the mentor's time throughout the semester. This was the first semester. They've all found their own. Sometimes I have to help. But all of their assignments then for the semester are based on that real product. They're selling a real product. And so they start with a presentation of the origin story of that product. What made it come about? What was the problem it was designed to solve? And how do you tell that story in anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes? So that you can just say, here's the problems. You're not talking about your product yet. In fact, we don't teach them to talk about their product much at all. We teach them to set up the problems that you're solving and then what the solutions should look like. So we do an origin story, then we do one on their strengths and vulnerabilities of their product. Then we do one on the strengths and vulnerabilities of their top competitor's product. And then we do one of how you deposition those strengths and vulnerabilities of the competitor. And to do that, that takes a lot of time in the semester for us. But to do that, we help them to look at things that oftentimes get overlooked. We use the term table stakes. Doesn't matter. It could be anything. But the idea being that if you're going to sell a product in this space, you've got to have this particular capability. And we show them that sometimes we just brush those off, or we get intimidated by the things that they have. And so we teach them how to go in and look and say, what are they saying about their product? What do they mean when they say it? How do they do it? And how does it compare to what my product can do? And all of a sudden, we start to identify, and it takes us about 3 weeks of the semester to do this. We're able to identify, wait a minute, I shouldn't be afraid of them at all. And in fact, I'm superior. And it helps me to understand what are the 4 or 5 things. And that's what we narrow it down to, that I want to use to differentiate my product. What we're doing is something that many salespeople and companies don't do. In fact, at the end, so then after they do that presentation, then they do one on, they do a sales presentation using the spin model. And then they struggle with it because of the challenges in their questioning technique. And I want them to do that. And then we do a presentation at the end of the semester that is based on challenger or hypothesis. And they do that to their mentor. And often the mentors will say, holy smokes, we need to add that into what we're doing. We haven't even thought it through that way. So that's the focus of what we're doing, is getting them to where they can go in and essentially understand any good, solid product that they might represent, and then how to sell it in contrast to what's in the industry. Too much of what people call differentiation is just opinion. It's too high level. We have the best customer service in the world. I don't care if you say that. That doesn't tell me anything. Why is it good? Well, we give you a dedicated support person, and everybody else in our space, you call in and you get from a pool. Now, I could argue either side of that, by the way, but I'm going to make the fact that I have a dedicated sales or support person for them, that they're always going to be there, and they're not going to have to re-explain and all those things. Okay. I've done a lot of talking.
Well,
You got any questions?
That's
Yeah.
beautiful, Greg. Let me ask you a follow-up question that I get asked a lot from students. So in me and Donald's curriculum, we teach what we call the FAB method, feature, advantage, benefit. So you got to talk features, and then you got to relate that to benefits, how it's going to help the customer. But I love what you're saying here, and this is something that at least I think is kind of unique to our models, is you can't just say why they need to solve the problem and how your product's going to do it. You got to talk about how your product's going to do it better than the nearest substitute, right? But then the question always comes out from students is like, well, like how do you position yourself against competitors without seeing like you're bashing competitors? So I'd love to hear your insight on how you do that, because I know you do that really well. If you could tell kind of our viewers about how you think that's a good way to teach our students.
Yeah. Love that question. Once they understand what their differentiators are, they ask me that question too. And I just say, wait till next week, and then we'll explain it to you. And essentially you don't call out competitors by name. Now, if they tell you there's a competitor, then that's okay to address it, and you change your verbiage slightly on it. But in most cases, you just come in knowing who there is in the competitive space and what you're coming up against. And so essentially you use verbiage like this. Anyone you work with needs to do this, and here's why. And so make sure that you're asking them about that. Now, if I've done that well, I've chosen something that they don't do very well, that the customer is going to find very valuable. And it's done two things. It's set me up with a differentiator, but it also causes them to go to the competitor and say, how do you do this? And now I've put them on their back foot, and they do what I call fetching balls, because that's not what they want to talk about. But the dialogue, you only get a limited amount of time with a customer to sell to them. And so if I'm forcing them to answer a question they don't want to answer with some of their valuable time, I've actually done two things here. I've kept them from being able to talk what they want to talk about, and I've shown that they're not able to do something that I have convinced that the customer is valuable. Now, here's an important point. I don't tell them how my product does it until the very, very end. What we're establishing first is just what the solution should contain. And then the last thing you do, and you get them to buy in, you get them to verbalize why that would be beneficial to them. And now you've got them showing something they really want to act on. And so they've bought into it, and I haven't shown them how I do it yet. Now there's a very important reason we do that. One is because now that sets the solution up as the important thing, not how it's done. If you demo your product too soon, they'll argue with how you've done it. If you demo it at the end to simply validate that it has all the pieces of what the solution's supposed to include, you get very little pushback. So to summarize back, what I tell them is you go in and you just generically essentially establish, just make sure that anyone you're talking to can do these things, and you make it the 4 or 5 things that you're best at, especially if you're early in the process. If you get in, if you get in earlier than the competitors do, you are in a very strong position. And that's the other reason we talk about the buyer's journey, because buyers will talk to us during that early part of the journey. We've just chosen to wait until they're qualified prospects. And by then, they might have a vision that's very different than what my solution is going to include. So I can't talk about everything today, but yeah, those are things we talk about too.
I love it. Greg, from everything we talked about today, we need to prepare students better. We want to use research-based content to help them to get the best experience. We also want to give them some real-life experience as they're doing some of this practicing. And in addition to that, we want to ensure that they're selling based on the buyer's process. If there's one major takeaway you'd like a professor listening to this episode to walk away with, what's that one major piece of advice?
I would suggest it goes to, they've got to be able to practice and get feedback on their practice. And you don't have time to do enough practice in class. And then if I were to say, well, then that's 1A and the other two are 1B and 1C.
Fair enough. Well, this is awesome, Greg. If folks are listening to this and they want to learn from you or connect with you to test out your knowledge or pick your brain, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest is just an email, gregzippi@byu.edu. And that'll get us there. And that's probably the best.
Cool. Any closing thoughts, BJ?
Greg, thank you so much for being with us. What fantastic knowledge you bring to BYU and to our students. And I think why we're excited to have you on the show is because I think the things that you're discussing today are very unique, very compared to, I think, what other people are teaching. And so I think you're going to be a great resource to a lot of our listeners. So thanks for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me. And to any of the listeners, I love talking sales. If that didn't come through today, then we didn't succeed.
Let's do it again, guys.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out because I just love having conversations about selling.
Professor Zippi, thank you so much.
Thank you to both of you. It's been a pleasure.
Till next time, good luck selling.
Good luck selling. Woo-wee. Man, I'm telling you, boy, Greg sure came through. Brought some insights there. I mean, there's so much in that short period of time, BJ. I think we could have spent an hour and we could have gone a lot more.
I told you he was awesome. I know. And I know you didn't quite believe me. You thought I was just hyping him up. But that is Greg. He's a fantastic individual. He's a fantastic seller. And he's a fantastic teacher. I love the things he emphasized in regards to what he wished that he would have known coming out of school, but that he wished the new sellers he trained. I think he was in such a unique opportunity to do it because he was in sales management and leadership for so long that he saw some of the things he wanted to emphasize. And I think he uses some really established programs, Spin and Challenger, two of the main things he emphasizes, but he also teaches some things really unique that I haven't heard a lot of other professors teach. So I think this episode will really engage some of our listeners into thinking, hey, maybe what's some kind of unique things that I could add to my curriculum?
Yeah. And I think that's one of the cool parts is, right, when you're as a student, and what you mentioned about Greg coming from so many different types of businesses that he's worked in, he's seen a plethora of different approaches. What I've always learned is that there's no one approach in sales, but there are many different avenues or many different ways you can go about doing it. And that's what I love about his methods and some of the ways that he's constructing it in his classroom and teaching it. Definitely an action-packed guy. He wants him to do it.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So all our listeners, let's do all the things that we tell our students to do. We tell them to learn and then to practice and implement and try and iterative and give feedback. So let's take some of the things that Greg said and let's put them in our classroom and just see if that works and jives with our type of curriculum and our type of personality.
Love it. If you guys want to connect with Greg, we have some links down in the show notes so you can get connected with him, find him on LinkedIn and so forth. Listen, we want you guys to thrive. We want you to succeed. We want your classes to continue to be avenues where students just come to and soak it up, because the fact is it's helping them in their future career. We're thankful for you being here. And if you know someone else that can benefit from this podcast, please go ahead and share it with them. But as always, like we always share, we want you to go out and
good luck selling.
There you go. You guys got this. See you.